Are we picking up what we left off in one of the files that we already worked on? Or
no, we're going to make 2 new files. Okay. So tower 3, what we want to do, we've built our table, which looks fairly decent, and we'll come back to in later classes. We're going to look at how do we fill a drop-down list. Okay, excuse me. So let's make a new file. New PHP file. Let's call this file selectartist.php. So we're going to put a drop-down list on here that's filled with all the artist names in our database. Okay. So actually, we may as well make it look decent. I'm going to go to albums. Maybe I'll start by grabbing my bootstrap. We may as well use the CSS. We already have it. We won't do too much with it. So I'll put that stuff in the head, just like we had on our last page, and I'll copy the 2 JavaScript links down to the end of the body. Next week, we'll add this stuff to our album details form we created last week. We don't need it today. So I'll take my 2 JavaScript links, copy those. We'll paste those down at the bottom of the body. We'll put on a heading here that says select an artist. This is going to be a really simple form. Just going to have a label, a drop-down list, and a submit button. That's it. So we'll create a form. We can already see the 2 attributes of our form. We talked about them last week. What 2 attributes do we want to set when we create a form? Action and method, right? So what method do we want? We want to use post. So I'll just hit enter. I don't have to type it. And our action, we'll just call this one so this page will go to artistdetails.php. Right? We have an album details. We'll have an artist details.
So we're creating a new thing for week number 3, correct?
You got it.
Correct.
So inside my form, which is going to be really simple, I'll put on a label. It just says artist. So now we need an HTML tag that will generate a drop-down list. There is no tag called drop-down list. What's the name of the HTML tag we're going to use for that? Raj, you're close. Very close. Nope. You're closer the first time. Starts with an S. Yeah, select. So if we generate a select tag, we'll call it artist, and we'll give it an ID of artist. And the last thing we'll do is add a button that maybe just says go. So we haven't added any PHP code to our page yet. We should be able to load this page in our browser, and it should say artist. It should be an empty drop-down, and there'll be a button. And remember to make sure our end form tag comes after all of our inputs, or our submit button isn't going to do anything. I'll just check this out in my browser, see how it looks. I will put the code back up for you in a minute. Don't panic. So we'll check out selectartist.php. So that's what it kind of looks like. We're using Bootstrap so we can see we've got the font set up. But my drop-down list is empty. We haven't put anything in it.
back to the code for a second?
Sure. I'll also add 1 or 2 classes to my button. What color should we make the button? You want a blue? You want a green?
Green would be nice.
We'll do green. Okay, so we'll make all the buttons. We'll use the same class because we'll be adding more buttons to some of our different forms. So we'll give our button a class of BTN and BTN success. Those are bootstrap classes. The success class is green. So now our button should be green with white text by applying that class. I'll just double check it. Cool. So we'll make all our buttons look like that, except for maybe something like a delete or cancel button.
Yeah, I'm planning to see the code from top to bottom, but I'm guessing I should wait and get it from GitHub. Oh, wait. You know, so
Well, all I did was paste this section in. So same thing we pasted in from the last file. It's exactly the same.
just me and me too, and if you could please go down to just a couple of seconds, everything else is going to be.
Well, I'm not sure that it can because I do want to get this page done and I do have to introduce your lab and we only have so much time.
Right, of course. Sorry.
So I'm doing my best. So now we need to add a block of PHP code. Where should that PHP code go so that our artist dropdown is filled with all of the artist names that we have in our table? Yeah, so, right, but where on the page is that code going to need to go? So, Quinder, what do you think? Yeah, so in here, right? After we start our drop down, but before we end it, we want all the code to go inside of here. So I'll just break this up. Now what we're doing here is almost identical to what we've done on the last 2 pages, right? What's the first thing we're going to do? Yep, so I'll put in my PHP tags right here. So we'll connect. Down at the bottom, we'll disconnect. What do we do after we connect? We want to fetch that data from MySQL. Yep. So we'll set up and run query. Or the results. So again, that code, those 5 lines of code, they'll be identical. Again, the query is going to be different because now we only want the artist. The other 4 lines of code, they are the same. Connects the same, set up the query, run the query, store the results. All of that will be the same. So once we've run the query and we fetch the list of artists, what will we do then once we have that list? Yeah, we'll use a loop and we'll print out 1 artist name at a time, and what kind of HTML tags will need to go around each one. When we have a drop-down list with a select tag, what do we use around each item in that list? Well, let's see. If I do this, we can find a drop-down list and we can check it out. Right? If I inspect this element, we're going to see a HTML select opening and closing select tag. So here it is. Here's my select and end select. It's a little hard to read. If I expand, what do you see? Right. Option and end option. So that's the wrapping we want around the artist names. Every artist, for every row in our loop, we're going to print out an option tag and then insert our artist name and then a closing option. And that will add each one of them to our dropdown. So again, we're just changing the HTML formatting around it, but we're doing the exact same process as we've done on the other pages. So set up the query and store the results, loop through data, and then inside our loop, Play each artist in So we already have almost all the code because it's the same as what we've been doing on those other pages. So there's our process. So it's kind of repetitive, really. So let's do our connection again, same connection. We're repeating that line for the third time today. Why? Because we're using the same database, it's the same website. I'll turn my database debugging on. So if there's a database error, we can see the message. We'll disconnect. I have full confidence that if I gave you a quiz next week and said, what's the PHP code to disconnect from the database, everybody could get con equals null. What should our query be? So we're going to select artist from albums. Should we sort this list so it's easy for someone to find? Probably, right? Order by artist. So we want that list alphabetically from A to Z. A drop down that's not sorted alphabetically, it's really hard to find stuff if that list is long. Our next couple commands, again, same things we've done. Create a command, execute and call fetch all. Only thing I'm going to do differently on our other two pages, our variable we created to store the results, we called albums. I could call it albums, but here we're not really getting album data, we're getting artist data. So I'm going to use a different variable name. Group, what do you think? What should we call our variable that's more descriptive? What are we fetching?
Roger.
Yes, but what name, what column are we?
Artist.
Yeah, so why don't we call our variable artists this time, because we're getting a list of artists rather than a list of albums. You know, we could use albums again, but albums doesn't really describe what the data is. So I'd rather use a variable name that's more descriptive. So now we need another loop, and then we just need an echo command inside our loop. Instead of albums and album, this time I'm going to use artists, because that more accurately describes our data. So we get a bunch of artist names and we want to loop through them. And as we loop through, we want to add each one to our dropdown. So we need these tags like we saw when we looked at Blackboard. So the first thing we'll do is print out an option tag. So each artist name is going to get sandwiched in between an opening and a closing option tag. So this is really the same as what we've already done on the other pages. We're just using a different HTML formatting by using these option tags. This should insert the names into our menu. So you can save your page, you can reload it, and we'll see if we did it properly, if anything shows up in our dropdown.
Is that it?
That should be it. Good. So now when I refresh, my list is populated from A to Z. If we look at the source, we can see here what our loop did. So our loop generated these pairs of option tags and inserted the artist names into the middle. So it's working pretty well.
If you could just go back to the code.
Sure. I want to do one other small thing with this. So far, it's working well with the data that I have, but I'm going to add one more album, which is going to kind of mess with this a bit. And then we'll have to figure that out. Question?
No, just a small doubt. Why are we showing all the artists as a list and not as an option?
Does it show it? Okay. Is it showing it above the drop-down list? Below the, where does it show on the page? Below. Okay. Where is your select? Your end select tag has to be down here. So all of this code we wrote, notice where my two select tags are. It's opened here, but it's closed after. Is your ending tag at the end? Right, so that was probably the problem. So you wrote the code and it's working, but it has to be inside of the select section, right? Because we're trying to insert these into the dropdown. Does that make sense? I'm going to add one more album. So I'm just going to go back to my albums page for a minute. You're going to add another album. You don't have to do this with yours. When is this? 1999. What you might want to do, though, is add one more album that's by an artist you already have in your database. So I already have Blink-182. I'm going to add a second album by them. So now I've got two albums by one artist. How is this going to mess with my drop down a little bit? It's not going to break it.
It should make Blink-182 appear twice.
I've got two albums by them now, right? I've got California, Enema of the State. The problem is in my drop-down list, now they're showing twice, which isn't great, is it? That's kind of useless. So we actually should probably modify our query so that it only shows each artist name one time. You guys haven't learned this in your database class, how we can group records together, but that's what we want to do. Because we don't want Blink-182. I don't want it showing up twice. I only want it showing up one time. It's the same artist name. So in here, I'm also going to add group by artist. If there's duplicates or the same album, if I add 3 or 4 albums by that one artist, it will group those together in my query result. So I won't see any duplicates. So I've just added this on to the end of my query. You'll be doing this in your database class soon. So we'll use group by when we want to do things like totals. So when I use group by and refresh, whoops, that broke. Now notice I didn't get an error, right? Obviously I just broke it, but we don't see an error message. Remember, our PHP code, it's inside our dropdown. If I view the source of my page, though, I can see the error. Oh, this messy stuff. So somewhere in here, I broke it. Anybody know what the problem is?
The group by should come for order by.
You got order by is always last. Group by first and order by last. So I just swapped the order of those. Now it works again, and my duplicate is gone. So we just want to create one more really simple page where all we're going to do when we select an artist and click go, we're just going to display the artist on the next page. That's all. Maybe what we could do later, well, if we have time, we'll see, is we could make that page, once we pick an artist, we could get that page to display all of the albums for that artist. So rather than seeing all the albums, we could first choose an artist and then see all of the albums that we've got. So again, our process for selecting and displaying the data, it's the same on this page as on the other pages. We're just changing the HTML wrapping or packaging around our data values so it looks different. We'll just create our last page. This is like one line of code for today. Let's create one more file. We'll call it artist details.
I didn't exactly follow along with the example for the link 182 thing because I haven't chosen my albums yet, but I'll follow along.
That's fine. All you need is just to have the group by in your query.
Right. Well, I didn't add it yet, so.
That's fine. So once you add the data, you'll be able to see whether it works or not. Yeah, you won't be able to tell until you have some data in your database.
This is still on like artists, right?
Mm-hmm. So on our album details, we're just going to write a couple lines of code where it will display the name of the artist that was selected in the dropdown. That's it. Then I'm going to give you your lab and we're done. So artist details is a new page. We won't even worry about Bootstrap or anything on here for now. We may come back and add, like I said, the list of albums to this page. We may be able to do that later. We won't worry about that for today. We'll just put on a set of PHP tags in the body. So we'll create a variable called artist. If we remember from last week, how do we get that value from our form input? So our form was posted. Yeah, so we'll use the post array and then the name of our select, because our select box has a name of artist. And we'll just print out the name here. I'll just print out. That's it. So now if we select an artist in our dropdown and click the Go button, our next page should just show us that name. We won't do anything else with this for today. We might come back to this maybe next week.
Artist details.
So try it out. Pick an artist, click Go. Make sure that name shows up on your next page. Go back, pick another artist, just make sure it's working. So when I click this, it shows me what I picked. When I pick a different artist, whatever I've selected in the dropdown is displayed on my next page. That's all. So we've actually done 3 different pages where we're querying the database and displaying data from the database. As I said, we're going to do this over and over and over again until this becomes so obvious that you won't have any trouble writing these yourself. Okay. I'm going to push my code to Git in just a second, and I will put it back. I know a few of you are still working. What we're going to do next week is deal with, well, we'll probably maybe finish this page. Maybe we'll start by once we select an artist, we can show their albums underneath as a list. And then we also want to talk about input validation. We did a little bit of input validation with HTML5 last week, but we also should look at how do we validate things on the server as well, because our HTML5 validation is not infallible. I also want to give you your first lab. Okay, your lab is due by Monday night at midnight. It's a 1-page lab. Okay. So I want to review it, and I'll show you a sample of what it's supposed to look like. So the first thing you need to do is you'll need to, in your database, you'll need to run this script. Creates a table and it inserts 16 records into the table. I'm sure some of you, certainly you, Jesse, will recognize the data in that table. Won't seem too foreign. Right? Build 1 page, lab1.php, and all I want is you to connect to the database, run a query to select all the teams, and build an HTML table that shows all the data in 3 columns, okay? You don't have to show, I didn't even include an ID. You don't even need the ID for this. So it will look very much like this. In fact, hang on just a second. I'll see if I can show you a sample of the completed lab. Bear with me for a second. Maybe I have it. I guess I don't have a sample at the moment. No. All right. So it's going to look like this page, just with 3 different columns on it. Okay, so it has the team, the city, the nickname, and the division. That's it. So to submit your lab, me an invitation. Otherwise, I can't access your code. Okay. My GitHub username is right here on Blackboard. IFOTN, so you can find it. That's my username right here. Okay. So you add me through the settings of your repository. You just go into settings. Collaborators. And you type my GitHub username and you click add, and GitHub sends me an invite link to it. Okay. So you have to post two things: the link to your repository, and your page needs to be running on the server, either on Azure if you're using Azure, or DreamHost if you're using DreamHost. I don't care what server you get it running on, one or the other. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to click your link and make sure your page shows up with this format. It will mostly have this data, not quite all of it, but basically it has, yeah, that's pretty much the data that will show up is the team names without the numbers. Okay. And then I'm going to click your GitHub repository and make sure you actually wrote the PHP code, that you didn't type all 16 team names. Yes, I actually have had a student do this before. Rather than write the PHP code, they just typed the whole thing up in HTML, thinking I would just load it in the browser and go, oh, page looks good, here's your mark. But I actually do look at your code and make sure you did it by yourself. Okay, so you have until Monday night. It's only one page. So what you want to do is use the albums page as a guide. Right? It's almost identical to this page, what we're doing. We're just changing the query, we're changing the column headings, and we're changing the column names in the table. That's it. Okay. You can use Bootstrap to format the table. Not a requirement. It will look better if you do. No.
The repository has necessarily to be private?
Yes. When you're submitting things for marks, it should be private. Because if it's not, someone else can easily, as long as they can find you on GitHub, anybody else in the class could take your code. They used to be, as long as you have the GitHub for education, go here. So here's how you can tell. So go to GitHub. If you click new repository, okay, if you choose private and it asks you for this, then you're not verified as a student. If you're verified as a student, when you pick private, you won't get this. But if you see this where it's saying you need to pay, here's how to get around this. You go to education.github.com, click their big blue Bootstrap button that says get the pack, and then you click get your pack again. You say, yes, I'm a student. Okay.
No, I'm not a student, but would still like a discount.
And then you just have to put in your school email, put in Georgian College. It will send you a verification email. Well, it's going to say, we'll get back to you in a few weeks. You're not get back to you in a few weeks. They'll email you right away. You click the link in the email, and then it verifies you as a student. But there's one more step. Then you need to go into your GitHub settings here. So you go into your account and settings and emails and just add your student email here. Then you may have to log out of GitHub and log back in. Once you do that, you should be able to create a repository and choose private, and it won't ask you for a credit card. It will let you just enter it. So you just have to tell them you're a student, and then link your student email with your existing GitHub account. So you know you don't have to pay. Okay, you may just have to go through that process. And you only have to do it once. Once you do that once, they know you're a student, and then you get unlimited private repositories afterwards. Okay, be with you in a second. I'm just going to stop my video stream. Are there any other questions about the lab?
So how do I get the student verification thing? Because it should still be there, but
You just go to the education.github.com and say, get the student pack. And just keep clicking those blue buttons until you get to the page where it asks for your student email.
education.github/pack.com.
There's the address. You can see it in the browser.
I'm trying to finish up several things. Like one, I'm still trying to finish up the coding for artist details, as well as trying to come up with the list of artists for the